Hello, everyone. I've done my literature review on the effects of creatine supplementation in combination with resistance training. So, what exactly is creatine? Creatine is one of those things that many of you may know exactly what it is, what it does for you, and some of you may have no idea what creatine is or what its purpose is or what it can do. So, just a little introduction here. Creatine is a natural substance that's found in the body. It's mainly found in the muscle cells, which you can find about 95% of the free creatine in the body. It can also be found in the brain, which you would be able to find the last remaining 5% of the free creatine in the body. And its main role is in aiding the muscles to produce more energy more quickly during anaerobic exercise. So basically, as you all know, ATP is the primary energy source for the human body. And during exercise, you are starting to deplete your storages of ATP. As you're running out of ATP, you need something that will be able to regenerate that ATP so you can continue to exercise at the same intensity that you are currently in. So ATP resynthesis occurs with the splitting of a creatine phosphate molecule. And that's done by the enzyme creatine phosphokinase. So phosphate from the creatine reforms ATP and rapid phosphorylation of ADP to back to the usable form of ATP as the body's energy source. So here are just some diagrams that may better illustrate what I was just saying in the main role of creatine. So ATP is the source of energy for every cell in our body. Muscle contractions causes your body to use all of its ATP, and the phosphate byproduct from working out is ADP. And then creatine supplementation helps turn that ADP back into ADP for energy in recovery with that splitting of the phosphate molecule. Now, this second diagram here in the middle is pretty much the same thing as the first molecule, just with less words. And it's pretty easy to follow along. As you see, the energy is used up, ADP is created, and with more creatine, you're able to resynthesize that ATP into more energy to continue your workout. I also included this little diagram of common myths and truths about creatine. Creatine is often one of the most misunderstood supplements in the market, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of those. So if you want to pause that and just read through them yourself, you're more than welcome to. But I'm just going to move on for now. So what are the types of creatine are there? We have endogenous creatine, which is the naturally producing creatine within the body, and it's primarily synthesized in the kidneys and completed in the liver. It's produced by the amino acids arginine, glycine, and methionine, and that production in the body only yields about 1 to 2 grams of this endogenous creatine each day in our bodies, which really isn't a lot. So, most of us rely on exogenous creatine, which is implemented into the body mainly from the diet that we consume. Whether it's beef, pork, chicken, fish, pretty much any other protein is pretty high in creatine, uh, which they all have about 2 to 5 grams per pound. And for those of us that do not consume a high protein diet, whether vegetarian, vegan, maybe even just don't like the way a good steak tastes, you may need to look into supplementation to increase these creatine levels in the body. So, what types of creatine supplementation are there? Well, there's two popular creatine supplements that are the most commonly used in the market, and they would be creatine monohydrate and creatine hydrochloride. So creatine monohydrate often requires a loading phase followed by a maintenance phase. So during this loading phase, the subject would often take 25 grams of creatine monohydrate for the first week of their use, so the first 7 days, and they would follow that up by the suggested serving size of 5 grams for the remainder of their phase, whether it be a couple weeks to a couple months. That would be their maintenance phase. And creatine hydrochloride, on the other hand, does not require a loading phase and it has a lesser serving size. It's mainly due to the hydrochloride portion of the creatine, it improves the absorption rates in the body, so you're not needing to intake as much to get the same effects of creatine hydrochloride versus creatine monohydrate. Now, they both look very similar. They're white, powdery substance, but it is common that monohydrate does not have a taste at all, and if anything, it's a little grainy. But creatine hydrochloride is a little bit of a sour taste and even acidic, and it could be even acidic. Um, some concerns for creatine supplementation, as for any supplement, would be gastrointestinal discomfort. That's pretty much common throughout any supplementation, but for creatine, they're pretty mild symptoms and nothing really to worry about. Another concern would be water retention. As you are supplementing this creatine into your body, the muscles will retain the water as they're trying to get that into its cells. And the final concern would be kidney and liver dysfunction. There are currently being studies done researching whether or not kidney and liver function is being affected by creatine supplementation long term. Some scientists are worried that if you use creatine supplementation over a long time, your kidney and liver may even stop producing it naturally, and your body would become reliable on the supplementation for its creatine sources. Now, the second portion of the literature review was with resistance training. So, what exactly is resistance training? I'm sure everyone here knows of an example of resistance training. As I was reading the introductions, we have a lot of current athletes or past athletes. So I'm sure you've all participated in some type of resistance training at some point in your life, just living a active lifestyle. But resistance training is defined as any type of physical exercise that causes the muscles to contract against an external resistance force. The main goals of resistance training would be to improve muscular strength, endurance, power, and or increase muscle hypertrophy, which is basically just the size of the muscle. Some of the most common types of resistance training include free weights, weight machines, bands, and body weight exercises. Now on this page, we have a couple pictures of resistance training examples. In the first column here, we just got two examples of band work. Here we got a group of people with it under their foot. Same thing here, doing an exercise with the shoulder here as it looks like. Here we have some free weights, whether it's barbell or dumbbell, as you can see in the bottom picture. Or finally, we have two pictures of these women using weight machines for their resistance training. So what exactly was the purpose of this literature review? It was to investigate whether or not creatine supplementation is efficient in further improving the results of resistance training. And as we just mentioned in the previous slide, the main goals of resistance training would be to improve strength, endurance, power, and hypertrophy. But to further investigate whether or not creatine increases these effects at a quicker rate. So the methods used in the literature review, I conducted some electronic searches of several databases, including ScienceDirect, Sports Discus, Ovid Journals, and Medline. Now, I did not set a time range for the initial research, as creatine has been was researched for a decent amount of time now, and I just did not want to miss out on an older article that might brought some valuable information. So therefore, I did not set a time range, but the oldest used article in the actual literature review was from 2004. I also limited the research to full text articles in the English language only, and I used three search terms to acquire the used research articles, and those three terms were creatine supplementation and resistance training, and creatine supplementation and performance. Now, as you can see here, those three search terms over the four databases were able to get pretty decent amount of sources. Now, creatine supplementation and ScienceDirect had almost 20,000 articles, which I did not go through each and every single one of those, but most of these for the creatine supplementation, it was a pretty general topic. I was able to use some of those for the background information and introduction information. Now, creatine supplementation and resistance training was much more narrowed down. As you can see, we had about 1,082 in Science Direct, 101 in Sports Discuss, 6,327 Nova journals, and 153 in Medline, and then followed that with creatine supplementation and athletic performance, with 398 in Science Direct, 30 in Sports Discus, 6,521 in Ovid journals, and 57 in Medline. Now, these two search terms right here were very more narrowed down and exactly what we were looking for in my specific literature review. Now, from the narrowed results, I selected 7 articles for further research. And with their results in the studies, I was a little surprised that the results varied between the studies. 4 of these studies agreed that creatine supplementation further increased the effects of resistance training. 1 study disagreed completely that creatine supplementation did not further increase the effects of resistance training at all. And 2 studies were non-conclusive, meaning some of the results of the study suggested creatine supplementation was effective, while others results claimed they were not effective. Now, from those research articles, even with the ones that disagreed or were non-conclusive, I was able to come to the final conclusion that creatine supplementation is effective in further increasing the results of resistance training, such as muscular strength, endurance, power, and muscle hypertrophy for the average person. Now, these results are obviously dependent on the program of your resistance training, whether you're training for strength, you may be training for endurance, or if you're a power athlete, say a jumper in track and field. But the main thing that was allowed me to come to this conclusion was the many limiting factors throughout the studies. Now, there wasn't really a set amount of creatine supplementation in any of the studies. Some of the studies used the flat amount of 5 grams for every subject in their study, while others used, say, zero point 0.1 grams per kilogram body mass for their subjects. Now, those amounts could often vary due to the size of a person. Say a man is about 200 pounds, or a smaller man that may weigh 150 pounds are going to be gaining a lot less creatine than the other, which may be able to reflect it in the results. Another limiting factor throughout the study was the diet and food intake. One of the non-conclusive articles was actually done with a great amount of vegetarians and vegan identifying subjects. Now, these subjects were not getting their creatine or from their food that they ate, such as proteins. So this introduction to creatine as supplementation it would be still less than someone that's consuming protein at a much higher rate in their diet. Obviously, age was a limiting factor. Some studies conducted with younger athletes, while others were conducted with older athletes, and the rate at which muscle grows or is affected in those populations may differ, which then would see different results. And finally, the final limiting factor throughout the studies was the length of time in the study. The effects of muscle strength, endurance, power, and hypertrophy often take a long time to conclude. And some of these studies were only conducted for 8 weeks, which would be about 2 months. And within those 2 months, you're not always going to be able to see significant improvements of creatine supplementation versus the placebo. So, in order for those results to be more reliable, I would suggest further increasing the amount of length of the study. And those are pretty much the reasons I was able to come to my final conclusion that creatine supplementation would be an effective method of further increasing the results of resistance training. Thank you.